Good morning and welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm here with Kelly Kovack. She is the founder and CEO of Beauty Matter. She is a thought leader in the beauty industry, and I'm so pleased to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, welcome, Kelly. So, as my friend and as somebody that's in this industry, I'm super excited to have this conversation because I already have so much trust, right? So I want to know what you have to tell me about the future of food and how we can see it impacting beauty. As beauty continues to innovate. So, can you tell me sort of about like when you first started seeing food impacting the future of food?
I think the food industry has always been sort of an adjacency that made sense for beauty. Um, and I think historically, where we saw the impact was on an ingredient level. So very often the food industry tends to be a little further ahead when it comes to ingredient trends, especially, I mean, obviously related to naturals, right?
Right.
Um, and I think that as beauty and wellness have merged, I think now we're seeing a lot of products that would have once been considered kind of food and beverage actually being on the shelves next to beauty products. And they kind of live in sort of the functional food space. Um, and in some cases, as ingestible beauty is growing, a lot of the formats are based on food trends. Um, so I think it's really we're seeing the convergence as beauty and wellness and health have merged.
I'm curious about the food and beverage and the products that you were talking about there. Can you give us a few examples?
I knew you were going to ask me that. Um, um, One that comes to mind is like Alice mushrooms.
Hmm.
So um, there are a ton of functional beverages. One of the things that we do at our events is in lieu of a goodie bag, we create sort of this pop-up market called the supermarket, and we always include startup food and beverage companies. So we've had tons of them come in and out. A lot of CBD drinks, some drinks that are based on supporting collagen. Um, there are sort of functional ingredients. There is actually one of our partners is called Tosla, and they produce collagen, and a lot of sort of ingestible collagen. Usually, ingestible collagen is disgusting. It's absolutely gross. But they have this technology that masks the flavor, and it actually tastes great without the sugar. So we're seeing a lot of suppliers even sort of supplying sort of food and beverage companies and beauty companies from an ingestible standpoint.
Wow, super interesting. Do you use ingestibles?
Um, I do, but not necessarily I think more from kind of a supplementation
Hmm.
standpoint. Um, I think some of the, I think some of the mushroom ingestibles, not the microdosing mushroom ingestibles, but more the, but those are interesting too. The more adaptogens,
Hmm.
so putting them in coffee, and that kind of stuff. When we have them around the office, so we're always trying stuff out.
Is there any statistics you could share around the impact of that and what we're seeing with the with that new sort of product versus doing it the old-fashioned way, let's just say?
There aren't any that I could, if I were to conjure up any statistics, they would probably be wrong.
Okay.
But what I can tell you is that it's a growing segment. So what we're seeing is a lot of early stage investors that were
Mhm.
focused on beauty have expanded into wellness. And some of them have expanded, include sort of these functional food and beverages under the wellness umbrella. Um, so I think, one of the things we do when we do trends is, one marker is following the money. It becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy from a trend perspective. I think the other indicator is Ulta and Sephora are
Mhm.
leaning into wellness a bit more. So, it in order to really scale these businesses, you need to have retail distribution. So the fact that the two largest beauty retailers are playing in this space or have begun to play in this space, I think bodes well for growth. Um, but it's still sort of the ingestible side is still a little tricky, because if you're building a business to sell, right, and the
Mhm.
path is a strategic exit and you're kind of a beauty ingestible brand, the only one really acquiring them is Unilever. Like none
Really?
of the other, yeah, Estee Lauder, L'Oreal, um, sort of the Japanese strategics, the European, no one has touched ingestibles other than Unilever. So there's not sort of a clear path to an exit. Doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but it's not sort of the I guess traditional path if you've chosen to grow that way. If you're self-funding, it's a totally different story.
Right, of course. I'm curious. I don't know if you know the answer to this. Do you know why Unilever has taken this on?
I think it's probably because part of their portfolio is nutrition. So they're already in supplementation. So, they made two, was it Liquid IV they acquired? I don't know. They made two very big acquisitions, sort of collagen and hydration.
When did you first start to see the beauty industry changing as a result of food? I know that we've always seen it as part of it, but when did you really see that it made this big pivot, if you will, or not pivot, but took this direction on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been there.
Hmm.
But I think it lived sort of on the professional side of the industry, and more specifically, sort of the spa side and, like destination resort spas where food is always integral into their programming. Whether it's, cleansing or, eating a certain way or farm to table, like that has always been there as long as I've been in the industry. And the concept of beauty from the inside out has also always been in the beauty industry, but it lived sort of in the world of spas. I started my career in spas, albeit, the reinvention of the urban day spa with Bliss, but, you know, that was in 1996. Like all of these conversations were happening in the professional space. Um, and I think it really started, I don't know, probably 10 years ago. I mean, if I had to kind of put a time on it, where it kind of came out of the professional space and became a bit more mainstream. And I think it was really perhaps driven by millennials who were more focused on, balanced lives and eating well and journaling and all those things.
And yoga,
Um, to, and
biking.
yeah, the work-life balance, all that kind of stuff. Um, and now I think where probably the biggest inflection point, like so many trends, was COVID. People really started looking at how they were living and what they were putting in and on their body in a very different way. Um, But I would also say that there's a whole other aspect of the correlation between sort of food and beauty. And I would
Mhm.
say that started also about 10 years ago. Um, and is kind of around the conversation of clean beauty.
Mhm.
So there were some really innovative founders who were trying to take on the task of the beauty, kind of the beauty supply chain and
Mhm.
where we get ingredients from and how products are made. So you saw zero waste brands kind of emerge, and you also saw ingredient upcycling.
Mhm.
So taking a byproduct of the food industry, and then turning that byproduct into an ingredient to be used in beauty products. Um, it and it is being scaled to a certain extent. But a lot of these things start out small, and the ability to commercialize them, like you have to find someone who is going to create enough volume to build a business out of it.
So I want to go back to something that you just said about, you know, people are concerned, or the millennials, it was about what you're putting on your body and what you're ingesting in your body.
Mhm.
And, there's a lot of conversation around when you put it on your body, it's not going into the bloodstream.
Mm,
So if that's the case, you know, where do you position, how do you look at that? If it's not going into the bloodstream, I mean, I care what I put on my body, but
mhm.
I also feel like if I'm allergic to sugar, why should I put sugar on my body? Like a sugar scrub, right? I'm
Right,
just using that as an example.
right.
But, people are really concerned about it being clean beauty and not having anything that they can't pronounce or they don't know what it is, right? And I'm
Mm.
wondering, so as we shift over to these clean beauty products and we know everything or the most of what's in there, are we getting the same kinds of results? Are they
What?
showing as being as, are we giving anything
Well,
up?
it depends. So, I mean, clean beauty. First of all, there is no definition of what clean beauty is. And I think it started out with the right intentions, and then it turned into a bit of fear mongering and scaring people. And it doesn't mean anything at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Um, I think that, and there's also, it's not black and white because there is not an inherently good or bad ingredient. It's about how it's being used in the formulation and the percentage at which it's being used. You know, the most common example is like poison ivy is natural, but you're not going to rub it all over your body, right? So
Right.
there are, so there also needs to be sort of a level of common sense
Hmm.
around these conversations. Um, and to a certain extent, like clean beauty has sort of become table stakes. But I will say that um, regardless of what people say they want, purchasing is different. They want products that work.
So, what role does education play in this for the businesses? Because the consumers don't necessarily know all this, right? They read something, they read two words of it, they hear some greenwashing. They don't really know the answers. They don't know that if, some of these ingredients are not as amazing just because they're natural.
Yeah,
Or,
I think listen, beauty is a big business. And I would argue that beauty marketers are some of the best in the world. We know our way around regulations. And I think that, you know, there's always a spectrum when it comes to trends, right? There are people who are pushing trends forward, and then there are people who follow them. There are people who create brands and do things because they really believe in it. And then you have others that are just trying to optimize a business opportunity. And all of those intentions are very different when you build a business. And educating the consumer for beauty, it kind of goes hand in hand with marketing. But it is sort of this tightrope because um, even if you lead with science, not everyone cares about it. So you
Right.
kind of have to build these levels of communication.
About misinformation and about what people latch onto that's actually not really the reason they should make that choice.
Yeah, I mean the clean beauty, sort of the clean beauty movement. One of the ingredients that there were these like ingredients that all of a sudden it was like the fear mongering was insane around parabens and sulfates. Um, and what ended up happening is, I mean, and the funny thing is, a lot of people don't even want to go on the record. They're just like, screw it, I'm going to take the parabens out of the formulation. If you ask most cosmetic chemists, they will tell you that parabens are the safest preservative, and they're used at such a small percentage that they're not really doing any harm. I mean, highly loaded question, highly loaded. And there are a lot of natural preservatives that have come, like it's the chemistry around sort of clean preservatives has come a long way, but they're more expensive. You need to use more of them. And if you think about it, it's like these ingredients are there to inhibit the growth of bacteria, right? And it's important. Um, but that's an ingredient where it's like there was a lot of press around it, and it became so ingrained in the consumer's mind that parabens are bad, sulfates are bad. But there was never a conversation. There was like one study. So sometimes what happens is, and you also have, and I mean, it's in food as well. You have this group of lawyers, right, that are looking for brands that look like they're big enough to have some money, but not so big enough, not so big that they will go to court. And they go after these brands and file lawsuits.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times by making those claims and by the press enhancing it and bringing attention to it, we're guiding people in the wrong way. We're telling them to think this when this may not even be right. So I think it's kind of irresponsible.
No, I agree. I mean, I get press releases all the time from law firms or PR firms that are like, this study has been done, and they take a product and they put it in these really extreme conditions where something happens. But all you need is someone to pick that story up. And then the narrative is out there.
And it's hard to change the narrative. Once somebody
It
talks
is.
about it and they're saying it like with conviction and they're saying it like they own it, like it is emphatic,
Yeah.
people, take on that energy, for lack of a better word, and are like, oh, this must be true. And then all of a sudden people are, no longer looking for different answers or being curious.
Yeah.
They're just taking that as if it's gospel.
Yeah, and some of these lawsuits have done significant financial damage to businesses. And even if it goes through the courts and they are found that the lawsuit was frivolous, doesn't matter, the damage has been done.
So if we get back to, you had said biotech companies could be the future of beauty, or you see them as being, right? Are there any that you could call out that are doing anything interesting in this moment that you're seeing?
Yeah, one that is really interesting is called Debut. They're based they are based in San Diego. And they have a really interesting approach because the the challenge with biotech is, like you said, the education. So there is a real sort of there is a moment where people don't really know what biotech means.
Hmm.
Um, but they have set up a, like a very interesting business structure. So they've launched a brand called Dende, and they use Dende as almost like a lab to learn.
Mm.
And when I say that, it's like it's out there, it's being sold sort of on retail shelves, but they're constantly changing the messaging. and learning sort of what works and what doesn't work. And that informs how they build products for their other beauty brands.
Hmm.
Um, so they also got a lot of investment from L'Oreal.
Hmm.
So they are also they have a path to commercialization that has some volume behind it. They've also partnered with one of the largest contract manufacturers in the world, KDC1. And so they are able to help brands formulate with these ingredients um, and get to market sort of like depends on what you're doing between 9 and 18 months, which is very fast
That
for
is
a
that.
product like this. So there's another biotech company called Archaea that's doing very interesting work. Um, and then you also have some beauty brands that are founded by scientists. So one of them that I'm personally obsessed with is One Skin. They're based sort of in San Francisco, and it's three female PhDs. And they have done all this research around a peptide, and the products are phenomenal. So you kind of see you have scientists launching brands, and then you have biotech ingredient companies trying to compete with big ingredient companies. Um, and these ingredients they're more sustainable. Ultimately, they're derived from nature, and they're more sustainable than taking it from nature.
I think that I mean I haven't heard of these brands, which I'm very excited to then.
Well, but you wouldn't because they're way down the value chain. So these are the people making the molecules and making the ingredients that then go into products. So yeah, I mean, there's no there unless you're like in the industry, probably wouldn't hear about them.
Well, I'm curious now. I'm going to look further into that. You know, but it's interesting when I was in Switzerland a long time ago, you may remember, 20 years ago, if
Mhm.
I'm
Yes.
and okay. And a lot of the creams and stuff just seemed natural and had a lot more advanced
Mhm.
technology to them, like when we were in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what your thoughts are on that today, because they talk a lot about the regulations in Europe and Switzerland and versus the regulations here.
Mhm.
Are they able to do things that we're not? Are they able to create other products that we're not because of certain regulations?
Um, yeah, I mean, you know, in the regulatory world, so the EU has been more restrictive from an ingredient standpoint than the US. Um, I think that, um, but I don't know it doesn't really impact the efficacy of products. I would say, with the exception of sunscreen.
Oh,
Um, in the United States, we do not have the best sunscreens because the regulations are so old. And so some of the more sophisticated SPF ingredients can't be used here. So if you want to buy sunscreen, buy it in Asia, Australia, or Europe.
it's super interesting. So, for the future, if you look at the next 3 to 5 years, how do you see clean beauty and the biotech beauty, whether converging or surpassing, as it relates to the overall industry?
So I think clean beauty, it depends on where you live, right? So I sort of feel like in the US, I don't know that clean beauty is really a thing anymore. Um, some, some, I mean, I think consumers assume that, and I would say most beauty brands are trying to use sort of what is perceived as clean beauty guidelines.
Hmm.
Um, but in other markets like the Middle East or even Asia, the concept of clean beauty is totally new to them. So, we kind of assume like trends move at the speed of TikTok and they're global, but they're not really. And so clean beauty is a really nascent um, conversation in the Middle East and Asia. Um, but where I really think the beauty industry is going in 5 to 10 years, it it is it is going to go a step further, and you are going, I believe, we're going to see beauty and pharma kind of going head to head. Um, and I think it is going to be led by these sort of what biotech can achieve and consumers kind of doubling down on wanting efficacy and demanding clinical studies. And, if you think about sort of where longevity is going, it's all about performance and optimization. So I honestly think it's clean will be like a distant memory, and you're going to see sort of like beauty and pharma kind of going head to head, which is interesting because for pharma, beauty brands just don't get big enough to be interesting for them. But I think that might change.
And then there's the whole thing around big pharma, and people don't like that, right? So you have that obstacle and challenge for many people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think in terms of beauty though, the rigor that comes with pharma is
Hmm.
would actually be a good thing for beauty.
Hmm.
Um,
And
from the testing required.
the
Um,
testing,
and they,
all the studies and
yeah,
everything is really expensive to do when you're
yeah,
independent.
yeah. So I don't know, but I think science has become more important. Um, And yeah, I mean, I think if you're just talking about, biotech, I mean, there's always going to be people who love just, beautiful natural products. But,
Mhm.
there's the implication of climate on the supply chain.
Mhm.
So if you base your products on natural ingredients, you have the fluctuation
Of the
of the
climate.
ingredient cost that's based on the climate.
So my other question to you is, what role do you think the doctor made products, right? So you go to a dermatologist and or and they have their own line and they all make their own lines, right? I mean, a lot of them. So what role do you think that's going to play in here, and what direction will they go?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there have always been doctor brands. They kind of come in and out of fashion.
Hmm.
Um, and I think a lot of these brands also reflect the larger landscape of beauty. So some lean really into biotech, some lean more towards natural, some are kind of in between. Um, but I think the interesting thing is that there's a segment of consumers that want to get their information from experts.
Right.
So we've seen a rise in doctor brands. We've seen a rise in brands created by estheticians and even cosmetic chemists. So consumers, I mean, influencers like the traditional kind of, Instagram influencer still exists, but there are certain categories where people want to get their information from experts.
So if there are, new brands out there that are innovating in this space, what are the top three things you tell them to look for?
I think the first thing is really make sure that you have a point of difference, um, because it's a really crowded space. It's super competitive. So that's the first thing is make sure that you have a truly unique point of difference, and you articulate it well. And think that through all of the touch points, from the name through the marketing through the package. Um, I think the other thing is have a plan for where you're going to sell it, because creating a brand is the easy part. And it's very easy to say, I'm going to sell D2C on my website. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely an option. but acquiring customers is sort of a whole different ballgame. So know where you want to sell the product and know that you have sort of a plan for distribution. And also when you're planning the launch, make sure that you don't spend all your money on the branding and the production, because you have to market the stuff. So, make sure that you have enough money for operating expenses, and also be patient. It takes a long time to build a brand. So, we've all heard these stories of, you know, brands launching and scaling to $100 million in 3 years. Yeah, it's possible. But it takes an awful lot of money. And, I think and I think this is not limited to beauty, right? I think, launching a brand is hard and it takes time. And even when you check all the boxes, it looks great, you win tons of awards, you're in the best retailers, you also need a little bit of luck,
Mm-hmm.
because you can make decisions and they can kind of cut both ways. You can make a decision and it like your brand goes through the roof, and you can make a decision and it was a good decision, it just didn't work and you can't recover from it.
Right.
So, I think you have to sort of stick around long enough for luck to happen too. You just have to be patient.
This resonates with me. I remember when I had Bjorn Ost on, who is one of the co-founders of Oatly Milk, right?
Hmm.
And Oatly Milk, to me, seemed like it happened overnight. Like
Yeah,
one day I went into a coffee shop and Oatly was everywhere. And it was like
yeah,
this barista version. And it felt like, wow, that just came. So to me, that happened overnight,
yeah,
right? I sit down and I have a conversation with him. And that was like 8 years later
yeah,
from when they started, right? That all of a sudden it became a sensation. And it
yeah,
wasn't that they weren't selling, it just hadn't made that big leap yet.
yeah,
So 8 years later, there they are in every coffee shop and now they're sold in every store.
yeah,
And so, it really resonated with me when you were saying that. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like all these, and
yeah,
they're public now, right? They went
yeah.
public. So,
I mean, I think a really great example is K18 that just sold to Unilever last year. Um, that brand was kind of 20 years in the making.
right.
And it came out of another business. And so, yeah, it was a 20-year overnight success. But, and also, I think the other thing is like a reality check for founders. The reality is most startups fail.
Right.
And, I have a whole string of them. Um, but I think if you're a real entrepreneurial, it's about reframing failure too. It's like some businesses just have a time frame that they
Mhm.
were supposed to exist. It doesn't mean that they were a failure.
Right.
They could have been successful, for that period of time. And I think what real entrepreneurs do is like they learn and then they move on again. And even some investors that I've talked to say, even founders that have had like that huge exit, if that's been their only exit, they question it, right?
Luck.
Um, yeah, like how much of it was luck, right? And so, some investors like to see founders that are scrappy and they just don't give up.
So for those folks interested in, I want to say beauty, but I also want to say wellness because,
Yeah,
I think you've expanded that category, and whether it's with the supermarket, which by the way only occurred to me that it's a supermarket, not a supermarket.
exactly. Exactly. All caps.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
for those folks that are interested in learning more and getting more insight, what's the best way to connect with Beauty Matter and you?
Yeah. So, beautymatter.com, very easy to find. Um, and if you want to connect with me, don't DM me on Instagram. That's a horrible way. But LinkedIn, I check all the time.
And I know you have a subscription based,
Yep.
is it a newsletter? So for folks that are not familiar with this, can you just tell us a little bit about that and how and if they wanted to sign up, what would be the
Yeah.
best way to do it?
So we have there's different levels to engage. So we also have sort of a free membership. So we have a lot of sponsored content, so that's available to everyone. And then if you sign up for our newsletter, you can get three free pieces of content a month. And then beyond that, we have sort of premium and professional memberships that have sort of different levels of benefits. But there's, if you're just interested, you can poke around for free. It's not totally gated.
And what kind of content can they expect if they sign up to get 3 pieces of content?
Yeah, so it's everything from, um, we cover the business of beauty and wellness. So it's a B2B proposition. But it can be anything from TikTok trends to mergers and acquisitions. We do a lot of profiles of founders and their businesses. We do roundups of launches. So sort of anything that's related to the business of beauty and wellness.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. We'll make sure to include
Sure.
your website and the details so that people can connect.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. It was great to connect.
I know.
We want to thank our listeners, right, for tuning in today here on the podcast.
Exactly.
If you're watching the video cast, don't forget you can download the podcast and listen to it on the go, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you are listening to the podcast and haven't checked out the YouTube video, make sure to check us out under Essential Ingredients. It's in the Next Gen Purpose channel. So, and we hope you'll follow along on Instagram at essential.ingredients. Talk to you soon.